Hello and welcome to Visiting Dugout, a Fans First Sports Network production. I'm Crystal O'Keefe, and today I have the wonderful Chris Towers on to discuss the Marlins. Chris, would you give maybe a brief introduction of who you are for those who might not know you?
Yeah, I've been with CBS Sports for 14 years now. I've been on the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast for 8 years, something like that. And I've been a Marlins fan for as long as the Marlins have been around. I think I was 5 years old when I went to my first game, and it's you can't let go of it, right? It's one of those things where it'd probably be better for my mental health if I wasn't a Marlins fan. But for some reason, here I am. It's 2025. They've won like one playoff game in the last 22 years. And yet I'm sitting here watching a Marlins game on a Wednesday afternoon while talking to you. So that's, that it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I understand that complicated relationship all too well. The last time the White Sox won a World Series, I was graduating from high school,
I
and
was,
my
I was,
my anniversary is coming up for that.
yeah, I think I would have been a junior in high school. So I guess I'm 1 year behind you. And I was watching or listening to the White Sox win the World Series on a radio because we had just gotten hit with a hurricane when I was living in South Florida. And so I think I might have watched it on one of those little, you remember radios that had TVs in
Yeah.
them? I think I watched it in black and white when they won in 2005. No, that would have been my senior year of high school. That was when we missed like 3 weeks of school for various hurricanes in South Florida. So that was one of them. Hurricane Wilma is what that would have
Yeah,
been.
I remember Wilma. Okay,
That's my memory of the last White Sox World Series.
that's great. Mine. I was going into college. I just graduated high school that summer. So, and like I said, I have my 20th anniversary for high school graduation coming up this year, which I am hoping to avoid because I don't want to deal with that.
You know what? I went to my 10-year reunion and my reasons were not altruistic. It was just that I was much cooler than I used to be in high school and I wanted to peacock a little bit. That's the only reason I think you should go. It's not good.
That's my reasoning,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. I was like, I have all these really cool tattoos now.
Yeah.
And I talk about baseball constantly. So that makes me really cool. Cooler than what high school Crystal would have ever been.
Yeah.
So
But I'm not going to 20. I would have to travel for that, and it's not worth traveling for sure.
No. So on to other depressing things. What's new with the Marlins?
The Marlins are not good, but they are interesting this year, which I think is a bonus from where they were last year, certainly when they started the season 0-11. I think immediately traded Luis Arias during that winless streak and were basically not worth watching the rest of the way. Now they've at least they've targeted a bunch of sort of quad A players who they're giving a chance to see if they can become something. Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby and Matt Mervis and these guys who've put up really good minor league numbers, but probably aren't long-term pieces, but they're giving them a chance. And they've been a much more entertaining team this season than certainly last year, but I think even more than most people expected. They're not good, but they're not a disaster yet.
They're like fun bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I put the games on, whereas my interest in actually putting Marlins games on pretty much disappeared 2 weeks into last season. So we haven't reached that point yet. We might get there, but we're not there yet.
But I find myself still putting on White Sox games, even though I'm just like, I'm going to be cursing.
I mean, you never know what you're going to see when you put a White Sox game on. That game last night, it's just we're recording on Wednesday. So the Tuesday night game when Chase Mydroff gets hit in the head by a pop-up.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything like that.
I have to remind myself that he's a rookie.
Yes.
And that is definitely a big rookie mistake.
That was tough. It was tough to watch. I think the White Sox haven't quite reached the interesting part of the rebuild, but they can still be entertaining, I guess.
They can. I also, when I go back and watch that moment, though, I think of that whole kind of meme of, like rewind. I bet you're wondering how we got to this point kind of thing. When I watch that video, I'm just expecting it to like rewind. And then Chase is like, I bet you're wondering how we got here. Like that. I mean, that's just how it is.
There's the one point where like from the one camera angle, he kind of looks at the camera. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. That was rough. Rough night for Chicago sports, actually. Because the Cubs also had like a historically bad meltdown in their game on Tuesday night. Rough stuff.
Yeah. Just Chicago sports in general.
Yeah.
Is at a state of being really embarrassing. I guess it's a little easier on the Cubs right now because at least they're
good. Yeah.
But yeah, just a fan of any team in this city right now is kind of humiliating.
It's not great. Yeah.
So I don't even want to get into like the football and basketball of it all because I just get angry when I do.
Yeah.
So as far as the offseason went with the Marlins, how would you kind of rate what they did or didn't do?
It was the Marlins are very much in a holding pattern right now. They're kind of, they made the playoff run in 2023, and that was very much a like, this is not real. They had a negative run differential. They had like 15 walk-off wins or something. It was some crazy number. They had a great record in one-run games. It was totally unsustainable, and it was kind of everybody knew it, right? Mm-hmm. Like they went out and made a couple trades. They got Jake Berger. They got Josh Bell in that season, and it was very much a let's see what happens, right? We're playing with house money here. We're going to have to rebuild soon anyway. Why not see if we can make a little run out of it? I think they got swept out of the playoffs by the Phillies, and it was pretty clear that was the end of a phase for the Marlins. And 2024, I think kind of stupidly let Kim, I can't remember how to pronounce her last name, Kim walk and let go of the manager of the year or put him in limbo. And it was always going to be a restructuring period. 2024, they were really bad. They trade Luis Arias. They trade Tanner Scott. They trade basically everybody who was on that playoff team. And this year was more, let's get, like I said, those kind of quad A, Kyle Stowers, Eric Wagaman, Griffin Conine, Connor Norby, Matt Mervis. Let's see if any of those guys can turn into a useful long-term piece. Let's see if Xavier Edwards, so that they didn't really make many additions this offseason. It was more, we kind of restocked the farm system. Let's see what we have at the major league level before we start moving some prospects in. And I think they've had some interesting pieces emerge. I don't know if there's a next Marlins playoff team or contender. I don't know how many of the players currently on the roster are actually going to be part of it. Xavier Edwards, maybe. Max Meyer showing some real signs of promise, but has fallen on some hard times lately. But they're very much in a holding pattern right now. Try to see what the next version of this team looks like.
Do you think, because the White Sox famously also allowed Kim Ng to walk, do you think that she has cursed both of these teams?
That would be fun. It would be karmically justified.
Yeah.
Because like I like Peter Bendix. I think the guy that they hired to replace her is a smart baseball mind. He has experience in the Rays organization. He knows how to work in this kind of environment where they're not going to spend money. That you have to build a solid foundation in the minor league system. Like I think all that was smart. I also think getting rid of her and the way they did it, the way they undermined her, they tried to keep her around but hire someone above her, even though she had turned the franchise around, made the playoffs, all that stuff with limited financial resources. I thought the way they handled it was terrible. I thought the way they handled Skip Shoemaker's situation, it was all evident of an organization that felt rudderless. And I think they have a direction right now. I think they're doing some things well, but the way they handled it did not speak well of the organization as a whole, I think.
Yeah, it definitely did not look great coming from them. I think a lot of people were rightfully outraged over that entire situation.
Even if she wasn't the first woman in that role to get that opportunity, handling it the way they did was bad. Like publicly undermining your general manager is a bad look. That they did it to the first woman in an executive position in Major League Baseball in a decision-making role like that was obviously a bad look. And I hope she gets another opportunity soon. I think she was good at what she did. And, it was kind of indicative of like that MacKenzie mindset that, the Astros famously popularized. And I think the Rays have followed, and where, we got to bring in the smart guy. Well, sure. But that doesn't mean you have to handle people poorly the way they did. And I think they did with Kim and with Skip Schumacher, especially.
Yeah. No, I agree. So you said you see maybe a vision, even though they're not super great right now. But how are you feeling overall just heading into this season? I mean, do you feel like it's kind of full rebuild mode, or where do you think you might end up in a couple months?
I think last year was the full rebuild. Last year was the tear down. They gave Peter Bendix the freedom to kind of remake the team in his image. They moved a lot of, the Marlins didn't have any stars, especially with Sandy Alcantara on the IL. It was a lot of decent players, Josh Bell and Jake Berger and Tanner Scott, these guys who are useful, but not centerpieces. And so while it was frustrating for a lot of fans to witness them once again go from a playoff to a teardown, I think in this instance, it was necessary. There was no foundation here for, a next great team. And so it was tough to lose Jazz Chisholm. He's so much fun. I'm happy he got to get away from the Marlins organization because that relationship seemed super toxic. And, the main piece that they got back for him was Agustin Ramirez, who looks awesome right now. And they don't have any can't miss prospects in their system. They don't have a Roman Anthony or a Christian Campbell. They've got a lot of like B- types, and they're at the point where they're trying to stack a lot of kind of interesting prospects and hope that one of them levels up. And, maybe that's Agustin Ramirez. Maybe it's Davison De Los Santos, who's probably going to get an opportunity relatively soon. But right now, it's certainly not the point of the rebuild where they're ready to take the next step. It's more about finding who can play. And then, the next stars are certainly not on the roster right now, I don't think.
Yeah, based on it doesn't. And I feel the same way with the White Sox. We don't, as much as I love Luis Robert Jr. and I want him to be a star, there are days where I'm like, you are tanking your trade value.
He's showing signs of life lately, at least. Like he's, there was a lot of talk this offseason, especially in like the fantasy baseball world, about like what went wrong for Luis Robert last year. And a lot of people settled on, well, it was a bad team and he just wasn't motivated. And there's probably something to that. But I do have to keep reminding myself that in 2024, Luis Robert played like 6 games, hurt his hip, came back faster than I expected from that, and then wasn't any good. And so at least right now, he's healthy.
Yeah.
How long that will last, always a question with Luis Robert, but he looks healthy right now. And over the last couple of weeks, he's looked legitimately very good, which had been a long time since we could say that for Luis Robert.
Gosh, yeah. Also, you mentioned Jazz, and I can't help but to think he would have rocked the New City Connect jerseys for the Marlins.
It would have been a good look. I don't love the new jerseys, especially it's the hats, especially. They look like something that like a well-meaning relative found at Target and was like, "Oh, you like the Marlins? We'll get that." And it's like, "Oh, thank you. Your heart was in the right place, but this is pretty lame, you know?"
It reminds me of late 90s, early 2000s Taco Bell.
Yeah. Which like that could be cool, but they didn't lean into it enough. Yeah. I think they didn't go quite far enough in the like, bring back the 90s look. I'm not a fan of the Marlins current branding in general. And I think I speak for like 99% of the Marlins fan base when I say just bring back the teal. Yeah. That's what everybody wants. Bring back the 90s look. You won 2 World Series in that look. Why? Bring it back. You've got an opportunity. Those things I live in New York, and I still see people rocking the 90s Marlins hats, like just random people out in the streets. Those would sell so well. I think everybody would be happy with it. Do it at some point.
Teal does sell. I mean, I remember as a kid, those starter jackets, like if you didn't have if you didn't have a basketball team or you just wanted to look really cool, you got like the Charlotte Hornets.
Oh my God, those Hornets. Yeah.
Because those colors were so good. So yeah, I fully support bringing back teal. I think most teams should just embrace that color.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to take a very quick break and come back and talk about what this series might bring for these two teams. All right. Welcome back. So let's first talk about this pitching matchup. And we kind of talked about this before I hit record because of our last day. But we'll start off first. We have Max Meyer and Bryce Wilson. The second game, we have Edward Cabrera and Shane Smith. And then the third game, Sandy Alcantara and Sean Burke. What can you tell me about this rotation of the pitchers that the White Sox are going to see?
This is the strong part of the Marlins rotation, I think pretty clearly. Max Meyer has, you look at the 3.92 ERA, that looks pretty ugly. It's been a couple of really bad starts in a row, but he looked like maybe the breakout pitcher of the 2025 season for the first month or so. He was throwing about a mile per hour harder with better shape on the 4-seamer. And he introduced a sinker. He was throwing his changeup more, but the whole arsenal was playing up better. And it was allowing him to really focus on his slider, which has always been his best pitch. But this year it really looked like it had leveled up. He's got this really hard, tight gyro slider that he can throw in any count. He can throw it to righties. He can throw it to lefties. He can use it as a swing and miss pitch, but he can also throw it kind of more as a cutter type pitch, especially against lefties, jam them inside. And it's just, he's looked really good overall. The last couple of starts, the feel for the slider hasn't been as good. And it's kind of taken him downhill. He hasn't, I think it's only 3 strikeouts in the last 2 starts. But overall, I think it's been a very promising start for Max Meyer. And, he was once one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. And the Marlins as an organization have done a good job of developing pitchers over the past couple of years. And he seems like another win getting back to that level. It's just, can he find the consistency? Can he consistently throw that slider as both a wipeout pitch and, something that he can throw for strikes? Remains a work in progress, but I think he's clearly moving in the right direction overall.
So the other two both have fairly high ERAs right now. I know Cabrera was 6.29.
Yep.
And then Sandy, who we know, we love, very, very elevated at 8.42.
Yep.
So what happened?
In Cabrera's case, I think I've given up on chasing the upside here because he's a weird pitcher in that his fastballs are by far his worst pitches. But not just that, because, hey, that happens. Even guys who throw hard can have suboptimal shape. And his problem is he cannot command his fastballs. He has a much better feel for his changeup, which he throws as his primary pitch, his slider, even his curveball. He tends to command those pitches much better than his fastball. And for a while, it was like, man, that feels like an easy fix, right? Like, just throw your straightest pitch in the zone, up in the zone, preferably, and it'll be good. But he doesn't have a feel for his fastballs. And he's 27 years old. We're 300 innings into his career. It's not a huge sample size, but it's been consistent over enough seasons that I'm pretty much just thinking this is what he is. And I think he probably ends up moving into the bullpen, probably for another team at some point. But it's the kind of live arm that teams will talk themselves into. And I would guess if Edward Cabrera goes on a decent stretch in the next month or two, he's probably a prime trade candidate, because I don't think he's a long-term choice option for the Marlins. And then Sandy, the stuff looks fine.
Mm-hmm.
He's still maxing out at 99, close to 100 miles per hour. He's still averaging 97.5 with the four-seamer. It's just the command's off. He's not throwing strikes the way he usually does. He's not, he's missing big. When he's at his best, Sandy Alcantara was a guy who tended to miss by a little bit.
Yeah.
He lived on the edges of the zone. He generated weak, awkward swings on pitches just at the bottom of the strike zone, especially, and he just hasn't been that yet. And that's not terribly surprising. The common refrain is command is kind of the last thing to come back after Tommy John surgery. So I still think Sandy Alcantara will at some point look like an ace. He just really doesn't right now. His most recent start, I think it was 4 earned runs in 5 innings. That was it was 5 earned runs in 5 innings. He gave up 2 home runs to Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman. Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
those guys will do that. That's kind of the whole point of having the Dodgers lineup is you can pitch well to everyone and you make a couple mistakes to the wrong guys and your stat line is going to look terrible. So I actually thought from a process standpoint, that was one of his better starts of the season. And I'm hoping he can build on it. It's been a pretty disastrous start, but I think Sandy Alcantara is going to figure out he's still a premium talent. It's just some combination of rust and mechanics not being quite right, but I remain very bullish on him moving forward.
And Tommy John is so tricky because you see guys like Justin Verlander and Chris Sale come back from this, and they're, I can say it, they're around my age and older. They're old. They're old for baseball.
Oh, yeah.
And they come back, and it looks like they had 0 time off and they're 24 again. But yeah, and then you have to understand, though, that is a very rare case for those two. Like, I don't know what they are doing in their lives to still be able to pitch like this at 35 and 40, whatever. And then you have these guys like Sandy who were lights out and who were great, and they're taking a while to come back. And that's what I hate about that surgery is you just get such a mixed bag. You never know what you're going to see when they do come back.
And this has been a big talking point in fantasy baseball circles, especially because we had so many coming into this season, so many high profile guys coming back from Tommy John surgery and often coming back from a second Tommy John surgery. Jacob deGrom, I know he made 3 starts last year, but he was coming back. Shane McClanahan, Shohei Ohtani's still in the process of it. Lucas Giolito, we're seeing like he's back. He gave up 8 runs yesterday, I think. Like it's most guys come back. And I think even in the long run, most of them come back more or less as themselves. but you have to account for some degree of figuring it out. And I think that's hard because when you see Chris Sale or Justin Verlander, guys like that coming back and just looking immediately like themselves, it can be easy to forget that no, sometimes there's a process. Sometimes, these guys really have to relearn how to pitch in a lot of ways. They go from throwing every day to not throwing for 6 months and then working their way back up. And so patience is hard, but baseball seasons are long. And look, if Sandy gets on track in this start, that wouldn't be particularly surprising. It's a great matchup. So selfishly, as a Marlins fan and a guy that has Sandy Alcantara on several fantasy teams, I'm hoping this is a get-right start for him. It would be pretty worrisome if the White Sox rocked Sandy Alcantara this time out.
Yeah. I mean, the White Sox are so unbelievably unpredictable right now that it's almost funny, but I would be surprised if they actually got to him.
I did see a stat last week that they were tied with the Cubs for the most wins of at least 7 runs this season. Like, they are basically only winning blowouts.
Yeah.
They are either winning blowouts or getting blown out.
Yeah.
Which is a weird place to be.
Lately it's been very close games. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously last night that was just the most ridiculous ending that you could ever have. It's like really close games. There have been a lot of pitchers duels because surprisingly,
the pitching's been really good, actually.
Yeah, the pitching has been great, especially for these guys who are still very green.
Mm-hmm. I like Shane Smith. I think Shane Smith's good.
Yeah, but they either lose in the dumbest ways, or their bats are ice cold, or they start a series and they win 9-0. Like, there's not an in between for any of this.
Yeah, very little rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah. It's just it's a weird year. It's not. I don't have this sense of dread that I had last year, because I do think they are slightly teetering that fun bad stage, but it's very unpredictable. So I can go into a game and recap it, and it's a complete blowout, and then the next game I'm like, well, the White Sox are stupid and I hate baseball.
Yeah, they're kind of in a similar spot where they're working through to see what the next, who can be a part of the next good team. Like, I think Luis Robert probably going to be traded by the deadline. I think both him and Alcantara will probably have more games with another team in the next 2 years than they have with their current team, certainly. And Andrew Vaughn kind of seems like we're past the point of no return with him. Seems like a DFA candidate at some point this season, if not a, non-tender situation. But Maidraw's kind of interesting. He's got this weird skill set, and I think Cuero is going to be really good. Yeah. I thought it was weird when people responded to the Garrett Crochet trade by saying, well, now they have 2 catching prospects, and that's 2. And it's like, well, no, because Cuero has played some DH this season, and Kyle Teal, catchers aren't going to play every day either way. And they have by far the highest attrition rate of any non-pitcher position. So I think having 2 bites at that apple is a totally fine process. And I think Cuero looks really good. I think the skill set there is really strong.
He does. And Teal has looked great down on the farm, as well as Tim Elko, who every single day I watch Andrew Vaughn play, I think, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
We have Tim Elko. Like, maybe it's just time. And I'm sure they're just manipulating his time at this point. It is what it is. That's how Jerry's going to run things. But you see my posts. If I have to watch Andrew Vaughn play he was DHing the other day, and I was like, why? He can't do anything.
It's frustrating. And I wonder if they just all the position changes early on in his career, the pressure on a top prospect who's basically a first base only bat, it's hard enough. You see it with Spencer Torkelson. You're seeing it with like Vinny Pasquantino and Tristan Casas around the league, where if you can only play first base, there is so much pressure. And then Vaughn, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, never played first base when he got called up, right? Because he got called up when Abreu was still there.
Abreu was still there and dominating.
Threw him out in left field and just figure it out as you're trying to get acquainted to the majors. That's really hard to do. So, I think you could run his career back and see a different result, but we're pretty deep into his, like 1,000 plate appearances, probably 2,400 plate appearances into his career. That's not a guy who should be playing as much as he is on a rebuilding team. And
part of me feels bad because he replaced Jose Abreu, who was lovingly called the RBI merchant and was very good until he wasn't. And he had very big shoes to fill. He didn't have that. He was great in college, but he didn't really have that minor league experience, and he didn't have the tools he needed. And I get that that's why he's bad. And I try to tell myself it's not all his fault.
Yeah. No, like that 2020 season, especially for a lot of prospects, was just, it made it. I mean, one, they didn't play real games for a whole year, which alone is hard. But then, we didn't really get looks at guys, where they were progressing, how they were handling it. And then he just got thrown into an everyday role as a 23-year-old with 58, 55 career minor league games under his belt. Like, it was a really tough circumstance. And, I think the White Sox made a lot of mistakes with that core where people had a lot of expectations, but they put way too much on Vaughn and Eloy and Luis Robert, where they didn't really, like, even the last good White Sox team, which was probably 2022, 2021.
22, yeah.
They had no depth. They went into those seasons with just no plan B whatsoever. And that's a tough spot to put young players in, even extremely talented ones. And then kind of seems like the White Sox just didn't develop Vaughn and Eloy the way they should have. And Eloy, it was a lot of injuries as well, which you can't do anything about. But it felt like the way they handled that core was not great. And I think they kind of screwed it up a little bit, or a lot, frankly.
Yeah. Poor Eli isn't even playing in the majors right now.
Yeah. That was another one where, like, I know he came up as an outfielder, but man, watching him actually play the analogy, you remember the boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal?
Yeah.
That was what watching Luis Robert play the outfield was like. It just changing direction. Like, he needed several minutes of prep to change direction. He should have been a DH from day one or a first baseman. The way they built those teams was like, our plan A is Andrew Vaughn's just going to be a competent outfielder. What? No, that's not how it works. So it was frustrating watching from afar. I'm sure it was much more frustrating watching as a person who actually was emotionally invested in those teams.
I wanted to wrap Eloy in bubble every single time he was in the outfield, because it was him and his arch nemesis, the wall or the netting.
Yeah, the netting. I remember one play specifically where he just got caught in the netting.
Yeah.
And just like could not get out. And I was like, oh, this.
It's like a daily occurrence.
It was a little like Giancarlo Stanton's similar, where it's just like, you're actually too big.
Yeah.
Like, I know people think that baseball is not like a sport for athletes. And, you see like, you see Cecil Fielder out there, Prince Fielder out there, and people are like, you don't need to be an athlete to play baseball. But like, when you're that big, it might be harder to be a baseball player, because you have to be out there every single day. you're playing 160 games in 187 days or whatever it ends up being. It's actually, when you're that big, it's really hard to help hold up to the wear and tear of the game. So I think that's also Eloy probably just too big for his own good as a baseball player.
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes back to my theory about Chris Sale. The whole reason he stayed unhealthy, he's just so tall and lanky that it's got to get awkward and uncomfortable. But we have drifted so far off of this this series, so we'll move on from very sad talk. Who on the Marlins team do you think could be the biggest threat to the White Sox for this series?
Well, I think it's clearly, if Max Meyer or Sandy Alcantara pitch to what they're capable of, I think it's clearly those guys. They're both capable of taking over games. Max Meyer had a 14 strikeout game 3 starts ago. Wow. He was really impressive. Sandy, was the last workhorse in baseball for a while, and I still think he's capable of that. If you're looking on the hitting side, they've had a handful of guys who have really shown more than expected in the early going. Kyle Stowers has been great. Kind of viewed more as among that Orioles prospect crop who came up over the past couple of years. He was definitely on the outside looking in, which was why they traded him, but he's looked really good so far. Matt Mervis, kind of a similar situation on the Cubs, where I want to say he led all of organized baseball in home runs a couple years ago and just couldn't make it work at AAA. And the Marlins took a flyer. He's been really good. Kyle Stowers has been really good. And then I mentioned Agustin Ramirez earlier. He is a really athletic catcher who is hitting 280 with a 961 OPS in his first 14 major league games. Small sample size, but he was really productive at both AA and AAA last season. He's got uncommon athleticism. They're playing him at DH a lot, which is probably the right move because the Marlins have given up. Last I checked, it was 20 more stolen bases than any team in baseball. Let's see where that's at right now. The Marlins have given up 63 stolen bases. Oh. The Rays are second with 43.
Oh, goodness.
Opposing. So the White Sox, the way Luis Robert's running right now, he should probably steal like 5 bases in this series because the Marlins, it's not just the volume. They've only had 6 caught stealings on 69 attempts. So that's like what, a 93% success rate. That's really, really bad. So that's one thing to watch out for the White Sox is they should have a lot of opportunities to run. The Marlins pitchers are not keeping runners close. They've got a lot of big, long levered pitchers like Sandy who doesn't hold runners well. So that's one place that the White Sox could, give themselves an edge, is just being really aggressive on the base paths, because between Agustin Ramirez, Nick Fortes, who's back from the IL, and Liam Hicks has probably been their best defensive catcher. I think he's probably average at best. So that's a big weakness for the Marlins for sure.
That's good to know because they you mentioned Luis Robert Jr., obviously insanely fast, but then they'll put in Michael A. Taylor to pinch run, also very fast.
Yeah.
So good to know that there is some weakness that we can maybe take advantage of there. Yeah. So what are the keys for the Marlins to take this series? And is it really just your pitching is back to what it should be, or is there something else that they can do?
Yeah, I think it mostly comes down to the pitching. The hitting, the Marlins have, like I said, Stowers, Matt Mervis, Dane Myers has been really good lately. Eric Wagaman has had his moments. They have actually a better offense than I expected this season, but I think when they do manage to win, it usually comes down to, did the pitching show up today? Can they get enough timely hits? Can the pitching keep them in? And, they've had a lot of walk-offs, I think 5 or 6 walk-offs already. And it really comes down to can the pitchers miss bats, especially because it's an adventure defensively. With Otto Lopez on the IL, especially, he's by far their best defensive player. Xavier Edwards is a second baseman playing shortstop, and he is badly overmatched there. They've got a lot of first basemen around around the outfield, especially. And it's just defensively, they're very weak. So the pitchers not only need to pitch well, they need to miss bats. And I think that's the biggest key for the Marlins when they have success.
So on the flip side, would you say that that's your fear heading into this series? Is that the pitching will kind of just completely tank?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Sandy's overall season numbers, Edward Cabrera's overall season numbers, and then Max Meyer's last two starts. It can go really wrong for them very quickly. And it's not a particularly talented bullpen either. You know, the Marlins don't really have a set closer. They've used Calvin Fauché. They've used Jesus Tinoco. They've used Anthony Bender at times, and none of them are really anything more than average, which kind of similar to the White Sox in the late innings. So this is a team that has been winning with opportunistic hitting when they've won, or the pitching really shows up. And if the pitching doesn't show up, things can go sideways very, very quickly for them.
Yeah, that's fair. So moving away, obviously, from our respective teams before we end this, I just love to hear, your thoughts on just this 2025 season in baseball. If you have hot or cold takes or, any of that sort, just kind of where are you feeling? What are you feeling right now with where this baseball season is heading?
I love baseball. I'm so lucky that I get to write and talk about baseball for my job. I sit here and I'm watching baseball all day. It's the best. And what would be a hot take? MacKenzie Gore on the Washington Nationals looks like he is making an absolute ace leap. He has always had the potential, and it's been really fun to watch him figure it out. So that's one guy that I'm really enjoying watching right now. I just wrote about Nathan Eovaldi, who has always been such an interesting pitcher because, he used to be on the Marlins way back in the day. 2012, I think, is when he made his debut with them. And at that point, he was like the hardest throwing pitcher in baseball, but he was one of those hard throwing pitchers whose fastball wasn't any good. And so he's had to figure out how to make that work. And he had another great start on Tuesday night. And the way he's made it work in his, mid 30s now is he's kind of going away from that fastball. He's been a, curveball, splitter, cutter primarily guy recently, and it's really working for him. He looks, frankly, I think he's off to the best start of his career. And so that's been really fun to watch. So, and the way the Rangers season is going, they're only going as far as they're pitching right now.
Yeah.
Because that offense has been bad. And I was shocked to realize that they have the fourth oldest lineup in baseball, because they kind of came out of nowhere 2 years ago.
They did.
And when that happens, you think like, oh, well, it's a bunch of young guys. But no, it was Marcus Semien they signed, and Corey Seager they signed, and Adolis Garcia was in his late 20s when he broke out. So he's already on the wrong side of 30. And so the Rangers, I know, as someone who's now in my late 30s officially, it does feel weird when, there's that famous tweet that's like, I'm 35 years old. I'm in the prime of my life. Announcer on a sports game. There he is. He's a walking legend. He's a marvel. He's 34 years old. He's the oldest player in the league. It's like, yeah, that's how I feel. Yeah. It's like anyone who's in the same age range as me, it's like, how do you do it? How do you get out of bed? So yeah.
I went to 2 concerts in a row, like 2 weekends ago, and I was like, how am I
can't do it.
Walking. I cannot wait to go in for my massage next week because I'm dead.
I had a 3 concerts in 3 days stretch a couple of years ago. And by the third one, I just had to stand in the back against the wall because I just, my feet and my back were just killing me. I can't do it. Like I used to go to music festivals every year. That was my big summer thing when I was like 19. And I want to go back. But then I remember like everyone who's there is like 22 years old. I'm ancient. I'm falling apart. I can't stand up for more than an hour without my back hurting. I don't know if I'm going to be able to survive that.
you've got those orthopedic insoles in your Vans
I got
because
to. Yeah, absolutely.
and Tylenol in your pocket. Yeah.
And no, can't wear Converse to concerts anymore. That's for teenagers. It's gonna wreck my whole week.
I try to look really cool, but then my husband, I think, probably makes fun of me in secret because I have to slip in my insoles and like my super thick socks, and
it's a must.
It's like, and he's old. He's 9 years older than I am, and he's in way better shape.
Yeah,
He can actually stand versus
it's
me.
rough.
I'm just like,
I'm just like, I gotta make space around me to like stretch. Yeah, it's and then like every concert I'm going to is like some 20th anniversary of something where I'm like, that can't be 20 years. Like I'm going to see Clap Your Hands Say Yeah on Friday, and I'm like, man, I guess I was 17 when that album came out, but man, that makes me feel really old.
Behind me is this Chiodos tour poster, and it was their 20th anniversary of All's Well that Ends Well, and I was like, shut up. Quit saying the year. I don't want to hear. And then I went to When We Were Young last year, and it was all like, they're playing the 20th anniversary of this album and the 25th anniversary of this album by the Starting Line, and they're going to play it in full, and I'm like, shut up.
No, it's perfectly designed to make me feel extremely old. And the When We Were Young Fest, that's one that it's overwhelming. Actually, it's too many. It's too many people. Yeah.
It was a one and done. It was a hey, we have an extra ticket. If you can just fly out here, it's yours. Yeah. And I was like, bet. Those are some good bands. And then I get there and I was like, these bands are great. And it was a great show, but I fully regret all of this. And then I had to fly home the next morning.
Being in Vegas is always tough. And when I go to punk shows now, I sprained my ankles in the pit now. Like I'm that guy. I got to be careful.
Yeah, Craig's like, open the pit. And I'm like, no, we can't do this. We are 40. It's like the Aqua Teen meme. We are 30 to 40 years old. We can't do this anymore. Please stop.
It's tough. It's tough.
We're dying. Well, that's what I've got for you. I'm glad this turned into a We're Old and Can't Go to Concerts Anymore podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. This was
thanks for having me.
Getting to chat. Please just remind people where they can follow you.
Yeah, I'm at CP Towers on Blue Sky, Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you subscribe. If you want to, we're there 5 days a week. Fantasy Baseball Today newsletter on CBSSports.com. That's all of it pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. You keep busy. Well, thank you again. Best of luck in the series. It should be an entertaining one.
Yeah. Same to you. Thanks for having me on.
Goodbye.